outside of the framework of my talk. So this paradigm of human agency, this idea of norms and values, is rooted in what is described as the Baconian era. Francis Bacon was an eminent scientist mathematician who outlined certain basic ideas, and this is best described by one of your own brilliant intellects, Francisco Sagasti, and I will read an excerpt from his book, which is called The Twilight of the Baconian Era. I would recommend that policymakers in this country, government officials and business leaders give it a good reading because he makes a lot of sense. So here is what he has to say. This paradigm has its roots generally in the conviction of religious traditions as it relates, allow me to read an excerpt from the Baconian paradigm as defined in the following terms. To aim knowledge at power over nature and to utilize power over nature for the improvement of the human life. And we are now experiencing a transition to the post-Baconian age. For nearly 4 centuries, the program articulated by Francis Bacon, which aimed at mastering nature through understanding, has been applied with extraordinary success. However, in the process of succeeding, the Baconian program has managed to undermine its own foundations. This program needs now to be thoroughly revised, and among other things, such revisions involve redefining what we mean by progress and development, both for the industrialized and the developing countries. I'll quickly give you 3 examples of what is being now talked about all over the world as to what progress and development should mean. What should those words actually mean by way of being a guidepost for societies to go forward as it relates to their own future? You may be surprised. One of the smallest countries on the planet has adopted a program that it describes as the gross national happiness. It has nothing to do with, or it has something to do with GDP and GNP and so on, but the idea of gross national happiness is being put together by the Kingdom of Bhutan in the Himalayan areas. And the key variables in their paradigm is the environment, education, progress, and the idea of preserving what they have. There is an entity in the United States run by an eminent economist, not a conventional economist, but an economist that thinks outside the box. They have described what is known as the Calvert-Henderson Quality of Life Index. Besides just the idea of material progress as being the sole indicator of progress and development, they have incorporated multiple other metrics that they use to measure whether progress is actually being achieved or not. So they have included about 12 different indicators that can be easily incorporated and measured to allow for the idea of developing the idea of progress in a totality. The reason for all this, because of this rethinking, is because gross national product is not an appropriate indicator for progress. Let's take a couple of examples. This is something that we were discussing at lunch. Suppose you have a nuclear power plant which has created waste, nuclear waste. Talking to the nuclear scientist here. Nuclear waste, which, by the way, has a half-life of thousands of years. Nuclear waste cannot be simply got rid of. It has the storage of nuclear waste deep underground, has its own risk, but there is a cost involved in that. So the question is this: is safeguarding against the risks of nuclear hazard safety, is it a plus or a minus to the gross national product? Let's take the example of the number of people in prison within a country, guarded by, taken care of in prisons or policemen on the street that make sure that crime is not a rising factor. Is that a plus or a minus to GDP? Let's take the case of industries that pollute rivers and downstream have tremendous consequences for cleaning up. Is that a plus or a minus to GDP? The fact of the matter is, GDP simply adds anything and everything that has a monetary exchange involved. But now people are rethinking the notion of what GDP should be, and they are describing it as genuine progress indicator, where what they do is they actually subtract quite a few of these societal monetary transactions that are clearly not a plus. For instance, the amount of dollars that are invested in medical care caused by lung diseases because of pollution or any number of other, or because of food habits that creates obesity and heart problems, those should not be added to the gross domestic product or the gross national product. In fact, should be subtracted. One eminent scientist in the UK has done extensive research on this fact and has come up with the astounding conclusion that if you adjust for all those things that should be negative when it comes to GDP, the actual GDP on the planet has declined over the last 30 years and not gone up. So, as far as ICT is concerned, I think the future has to be in terms of orienting towards these new ideas as it relates to progress and development, rather than, as I mentioned early on in my talk, slavishly following existing paradigms and notions about progress and development. It's easy enough to do by simply saying gross domestic product and gross national product is wonderful, so I will tailor-make all my strategies to go along with it. But that is really not a path towards real progress. So there are a couple of things for ICT as it relates to everything I have discussed so far. One is design systems, keeping them simple, with as few variables as possible. The units of consideration should be as small as possible, and most important, let the participants be involved in a bottom-up fashion, taking the elements of the local into account as opposed to the top-down global elements, allowing for an evolutionary process with self-organization in how the system functions. Now that will sound like a lot of very big words, but I'll give you some 2 or 3 concrete examples and then I will conclude my talk. Jackie has been very patient. So here is a couple of actual examples. There is in the course of doing research for this talk, I came across 6 very, very impressive ICT projects that have been successful. I'll cite 2 of them. One of them is in a place in India where it's called Choupal, Choupal. Choupal in the native language in North India refers to a meeting place. And here is how ICT was set up for this core area. And I'll have to read you the description. It was a public-private partnership, and here is how it went. It is an effort by a private firm, ITC, to take ICTs to rural agricultural villages. These e-Choupal centers serve as both a social gathering place for exchange of information and an e-commerce hub. The system supports farmers who until recently had only an approximate idea of price trends and exploited by the traders at the auction, where they took their produce to the marketplace to exchange. The private company made significant investments to create and maintain its own ICT network and to train a local farmer to manage each of these centers. The computer is typically housed in the farmer's house, is linked to the internet via phone lines or increasingly by a satellite connection, and serves an average of 600 farmers in 10 surrounding villages.